Soon after, Redriver Logistics followed. They had been one of our top 3 clients, responsible for nearly 12% of our annual revenue. They cited similar concerns, adding that the loss of institutional knowledge has made collaboration untenable. Translation: Ethan had no clue how the systems worked, and no one left at the company could replicate what I had done. Ethan, on the other hand, was struggling under the weight of expectations. The board had initially been dazzled by his modern buzzwords: agile transformation, digital pivot, cost center optimization. But now they were asking hard questions, and the spreadsheets weren't offering the reassurance they had hoped for. Revenue was dipping. Client satisfaction was at its lowest in years. Internally, morale had plummeted. Employees whispered about how operations used to run smoother when I was around. How problems got solved faster. How I never needed to grandstand or micromanage, I just knew how to get things done. Ethan, by contrast, had implemented flashy dashboards that didn't work and hired consultants who didn't understand the business. By the end of the second month, the company had lost 4 major accounts, all clients I had personally managed for over a decade. 2 more were reportedly considering options. I hadn't reached out to any of them, they came to me. I had earned their trust over years of late-night problem-solving, customized logistics solutions, and being available when they needed answers. One afternoon, I received a call from Tanya, the Executive Vice President of Operations. She had always been sharp, and we had worked closely on dozens of launches and vendor transitions. "Ray," she said cautiously, "Ethan's in over his head." I stayed silent. "There's talk at the top," she continued. "The board isn't happy. They didn't anticipate this level of fallout. They asked me to discreetly find out if you'd consider consulting internally. Maybe help fix what's gone sideways." It was tempting to walk back in, head held high, and be the savior. But I had already moved on. I wasn't interested in being a patch on a sinking ship captained by someone who had thrown me overboard without hesitation. "I appreciate the call, Tanya," I said carefully. "But I've built something of my own now. And honestly, I like the view from this side." She didn't argue. She understood. A few days later, I was invited to a logistics industry roundtable, sponsored by one of the leading trade publications. I almost declined. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be back in the spotlight, but something nudged me forward. I accepted. The panel included directors from several top-tier companies. During the Q&A, someone asked, "Ray, what's your take on losing long-time institutional knowledge during company transitions? Is it worth the risk for modernization?" I took a deep breath. Modernization is necessary, yes. But you don't modernize by erasing the foundation. When a company cuts ties with experience for the sake of appearances, they often lose what made them great in the first place. Loyalty, consistency, trust, those aren't outdated values. They're irreplaceable assets. The room went quiet. Cameras flashed. That quote made the next day's headline: "Loyalty is not outdated, it's the infrastructure of business." Later that week, a mutual acquaintance forwarded me an email thread from within the company. Ethan had called for an emergency brand repair meeting. Morale was collapsing. Client inquiries were now trickling to the press. Someone had leaked internal documents showing rising customer churn. And rumor had it the board was convening for a leadership performance review. Meanwhile, I had just signed my 6th consulting contract and hired my first employee, an old colleague who had grown tired of the dysfunction and reached out to me directly. We weren't trying to compete with the company. But the difference in leadership was becoming obvious. While Ethan was hosting damage control Zooms, I was building sustainable partnerships, one phone call at a time. I'll never forget the moment my sister called me. "Ray," she said hesitantly, "Ethan's been quiet lately. I think he knows he messed up." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I warned him? That maybe next time he shouldn't sacrifice family for a title? But in truth, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt something else entirely: freedom. He had tried to erase me, but in doing so, he had only spotlighted my worth. The one key detail he forgot? I wasn't just an employee. I was the reason things worked. As the fallout from Ethan's rash decisions grew louder, I stayed quiet. Not out of fear or bitterness, but because I had nothing left to prove. My days were filled with clarity and purpose. I no longer answered to someone else's ego or spent late nights fixing problems that weren't mine to begin with. Instead, I was building something of my own, client by client, strategy by strategy. Word about Ethan's missteps spread quickly in the industry. It wasn't long before former colleagues, some of whom had once watched my departure in awkward silence, began reaching out. Some were curious about my consulting work. Others were looking for opportunities to jump ship before it sank entirely. The company that once prided itself on retention and legacy had become unstable under Ethan's leadership, and no one trusted his vision anymore. When I first held my newborn nephew in my arms, I never imagined that one day he'd be the one to strip me of my job. After 24 years of loyalty, growth, and building the very foundation of this branch, I watched him walk into the office with a smug grin, now the newly promoted regional manager. Within hours, he called me in. "We're restructuring," he said coldly. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." No warning. No gratitude. Just a cold dismissal. But what he didn't realize, what he completely overlooked, was that I still held the one thing he desperately needed. I joined the company long before my nephew, Ethan, even graduated college. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I gave it everything I had. I started out in logistics, climbing slowly through the ranks with grit, reliability, and the kind of quiet leadership that doesn't make headlines but builds empires. I had been there through 3 CEOs, 2 recessions, and 1 near collapse of the supply chain that I personally salvaged with sleepless nights and emergency rerouting. I had relationships with every vendor and client. When people had problems, they called me. I was the quiet center of it all. Ethan, my sister's only son, was always smart, but not the kind to grind. He liked shortcuts. While I was working overtime to keep shipments on track, he was going viral for giving motivational speeches at startup events. Still, I never held that against him. I encouraged him when he landed his MBA. I even helped him get an internship at our company. I vouched for him. Pushed the senior leadership to consider him seriously. And when the board announced he was the new regional manager, I smiled politely, even though the undercurrent in the office was thick with disbelief. He didn't earn it. Everyone knew that. But I kept my head down. Maybe he'd rise to the occasion. Maybe he'd lead with some humility. But on his first day, the moment he stepped out of his newly glass-walled office, it was clear he had other plans. He strutted through the halls in a tailored suit, greeting employees he barely remembered from his internship days. His assistant, a recent hire with no background in operations, followed closely behind, clipboard in hand, nodding like a shadow. At 10:45 a.m., I got the calendar invite, meeting with Regional Manager Office 4B. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I didn't expect what came next either. I walked in, and Ethan didn't even look up. He was checking something on his phone. "Uncle Ray," he said, finally glancing at me. "Thanks for coming in." He didn't invite me to sit. I stood. He continued, "As you know, we're undergoing a realignment. Corporate has asked for cost efficiency. I've reviewed the org chart and your role, it's outdated. Honestly, I think your time here has run its course." My jaw clenched. "Ethan, are you firing me?" "I'm not firing you," he said with a rehearsed smile. "I'm evolving the company. And unfortunately, some roles no longer align with our strategic vision. You'll receive severance. IT will shut off your access today." That was it. No acknowledgement of my years. No recognition of my work. No, thank you. I walked out in silence, my chest burning. Word spread through the office like wildfire. People didn't say it aloud, but I saw the stunned faces, the forced nods, the fear. If I wasn't safe, who was? I went home that day, furious, not just at Ethan, but at myself. I had built everything for this company. The logistics systems. The client trust. The emergency response protocols. But it all belonged to them, not to me. Or so I thought. 3 days later, my personal phone rang. It was Martin, one of our longest-standing clients. He sounded agitated. "Ray, what's going on over there? We've got a delivery delayed by 4 days, and no one seems to know where the shipment is." I calmly replied, "I'm no longer with the company, Martin. You'll need to speak with someone else." There was a pause. "But no one else understands our routing setup. You designed it. Who did you hand things off to?" I exhaled. "No one. I wasn't asked to." He cursed under his breath. "This is a disaster." That was the first call. Then came another. And another. Within 2 weeks, 7 clients had called me directly. Some asked for advice, others were just confused. A few were angry. Shipments were late, errors were piling up, customer service was unresponsive. By week 3, one client, Elkwood Textiles, sent me a message I'll never forget: "If you're no longer with them, we're reconsidering our contract. We'd like to discuss working with you directly." That was when it clicked. I didn't need a corner office or a title. I had the trust. The relationships. The systems were complex and proprietary in name only, everything I built was from scratch. I knew how it all worked. I was the value. So I started laying groundwork. Quietly. Carefully. I didn't poach anyone. I didn't break contracts. But I made myself available. I began consulting independently. At first, just for Elkwood. Then others joined. Some through referrals, others because they were fed up. They missed the reliability, the clarity. They missed me. Meanwhile, back at the company, the reports weren't looking good. Delays were up. Customer retention was down. The board had questions. Ethan had no answers. He still didn't know the one key detail he had overlooked: I wasn't just an employee. I was the glue holding their supply chain together. The shift came faster than I had imagined. Within 6 weeks of my dismissal, I had formed a small consulting firm out of a co-working space a few blocks from my old office. I kept things modest, just a desk, a phone, and a laptop. But my calendar was full. Clients were booking back-to-back calls with me, asking for help. Some wanted me to guide their teams through backlog issues, others wanted me to audit their supply chains. The problems Ethan couldn't anticipate were now unraveling under him. Elkwood Textiles officially ended their contract with the company and signed with me directly. They weren't subtle about it either. In their notice to Ethan, they cited leadership breakdown, inconsistent communication, and lack of operational clarity as their reasons for exiting. When I saw the memo forwarded by a friend still inside the company, I shook my head. That language was deliberate, crafted to sting. Then came the inevitable, a formal invitation from the board to explore opportunities for re-engagement. I received it in an email that was carefully worded, dressed in corporate politeness, but underlined with urgency. They didn't say the words outright, but I could read between the lines. They wanted help. They wanted me back, not just as a consultant, but as someone who could salvage the damage. I didn't respond. Not because I held a grudge, but because it wasn't my job to fix what Ethan had broken. I had warned them with my silence, and now they were facing the cost. Besides, I was in talks with 3 new clients, 2 of whom had specifically chosen me because they had lost confidence in the company's new leadership. That was the exact phrase one executive used during our call: "We lost confidence. But we never lost trust in you." Still, Ethan persisted behind the scenes. Through family back channels, he tried to find a way back into my good graces. My sister invited me to dinner, casually, of course, like we were just catching up. But halfway through the meal, she sighed and said, "Ethan regrets the way it happened. He's overwhelmed." I nodded slowly. He made his choice. She hesitated. "You could help. You know how everything works." "I used to," I said. "But I don't think I should be the safety net he falls back on." She didn't push further. She knew me well enough to recognize the resolve in my voice. Still, I left the dinner that night with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part mourned the loss of something that could have been different. Family and business rarely mix well, and this was the proof. A few weeks later, the company's flagship client pulled out entirely. This was the client I had on board personally over a decade ago, after months of relationship building. They cited continued service lapses, internal disorganization, and diminished strategic alignment. In their final line, they wrote, "This transition is unfortunate, but necessary. We wish the company well." That departure made headlines in a few industry circles. It was the kind of loss that investors notice and competitors capitalize on. The company's stock dropped by 14% in a week. The board issued a press release thanking the client for their partnership and promising internal evaluations, but the damage was done. Ethan tried to course correct. He held meetings, sent out morale-boosting emails, even launched a vision refresh initiative with colorful graphics and shallow promises. But the trust was gone. Employees were jumping ship, and even the new hires didn't last long. What had once been a solid, respected organization was now seen as disjointed and chaotic. Then came the quarterly shareholder meeting. I didn't attend, of course, but a former colleague sent me a recording. Ethan stood in front of the room, wearing his sharpest suit, voice quivering ever so slightly as he presented numbers that refused to cooperate. Questions were sharp, and the tone of the meeting shifted from informative to interrogative. At one point, a shareholder asked, "Can you explain the rationale behind removing a veteran with 20-plus years of institutional knowledge during a sensitive growth phase?" Ethan fumbled. It was a decision made to encourage new leadership dynamics and align with evolving expectations. The room was silent. The look on his face said everything. That night, I received a message from Tanya, the same executive who had reached out weeks ago. This time, her message was simpler: he may be stepping down. It didn't surprise me. The company had become a cautionary tale. Internally, they were calling it the Nephew mistake. In trying to prove himself, Ethan had dismantled the very structure that supported him. And the board, once complicit, now sought a savior. I could have gone back in with fanfare, applause, and an expensive retention package. I could have reclaimed my old office, won over the employees again, and made it known that I had been right all along. But I didn't. I chose a different path. Instead, I hosted a leadership workshop through my own firm. I invited mid-level managers from various companies, including some who had once worked under me. The workshop was titled, "Sustaining Legacy: How to Lead with Memory and Momentum." It sold out in 2 days. During one session, a participant asked me, "What's the biggest leadership mistake you've witnessed?" I paused and said, "Confusing titles with wisdom. Thinking a new chair at the table makes you king." True leadership is earned over time, it's not inherited, and it's definitely not claimed by firing the one person holding the blueprint. The room was still. Every head nodded. Later that evening, I received a quiet email from one of the remaining board members. No subject line. Just one sentence: "We should have listened to you." But it was too late. In the end, I didn't need a title or corner office to prove my worth. What I had built over 2 decades couldn't be erased with a termination notice. My value wasn't defined by a desk, a nameplate, or an organizational chart. It was in the trust one had earned, the systems I had created, and the relationships I had nurtured. My nephew thought firing me would clear the way for his vision. Instead, he cleared the foundation and left the structure to collapse. I never celebrated his downfall, though many expected me to. In truth, I found no joy in watching something I once cared about unravel. But I did find peace in knowing that integrity lasts longer than ambition without experience. I moved forward, quietly, deliberately, and with a sense of fulfillment. My consulting work flourished. Former clients, now loyal partners, helped my small firm grow faster than I imagined. We weren't just solving problems, we were building smarter, more empathetic systems from the ground up. My nephew eventually stepped down. Last I heard, he moved into a less public role in a different company, trying to find his footing without the shadow of my legacy looming over him. I hope he learned from the experience. I truly do. Because while it cost him his position, it gave him a lesson most don't receive until it's too late. Leadership is earned, not inherited. As for me, I don't look back with resentment, I look back with gratitude. The silence that followed my firing taught me how loudly trust speaks. The chaos that followed my departure showed the difference between presence and influence. And now, every time I sit across from a client, walk into a strategy session, or mentor someone just starting out, I carry with me the quiet confidence of someone who was underestimated, and then remembered. Because legacies aren't built in noise. They're built in what remains when you're gone.